So Elon briefly tweeted in response to someone asking about a smaller Cybertruck if they would consider it, and he did reply, and as we know, sometimes Elon does stay pretty true to even older tweets, that in the long term, it would make sense for them to make a smaller version of the Cybertruck as well. That actually got me kind of excited. And yes, before we start, oftentimes on the old tech channel, I would make whole videos on the leak of one report and dive into them in depth and talk about what I think it could mean. Yeah, you should expect the same thing on this channel as well. So sometimes I'll do whole topics based on one single reply Elon made, or sometimes just on things I would like to see in general. And this one particularly interested me. I've been making videos about the Cybertruck long before it was even called the Cybertruck, and one of the things I brought up was that I felt like smaller trucks that still have, a decent sized bed, it doesn't have to be huge, I think are a huge underrated market. There's a lot of people out there that don't necessarily need the best towing capability or a huge bed. They want a truck for the occasional workloads, but simultaneously, they're going to be driving this thing to work and back every day, and they don't really necessarily plan on hooking up 10,000-pound trailers all the time. The fact that Elon's open to this idea actually makes me want to wait a little bit longer, because I've talked about this in live streams in the past, but I used to drive a Ford F-350 at the Mandarin Ranch that I worked at, and I had to drive that car very regularly, and I was not a fan of driving a tank. It's almost an understatement to call this thing a literal tank because of what kind of beatings it can take and how cool the Cybertruck just looks. It almost looks more like it belongs in the military. And while I'm sure it's very easy to drive because there's no gears or anything to switch to, it is very large, especially if you've seen some actual close-up footage that people took at the event. This is not a small truck. Looks can be deceiving from a live stream, and on stage, Elon's standing quite a ways away from the Cybertruck. It may not look that big, but a lot of YouTubers that were well over 6 feet tall were taking pictures of themselves next to it. This truck is big, and in fact, apart from the Semi, the Cybertruck is the biggest Tesla they've ever announced, physically. Bigger than the Model X, way more cubic feet of storage, of course, and personally, even if the car is a delight to drive, it's got great acceleration, it's got great handling, despite all that, I'm not really a huge fan of driving cars that feel huge like that. Even if it's got great proximity sensors all around it and cameras in place to try to make that experience easier, I like knowing, driving a smaller car, I drive a sedan on the daily, that when I see parking spaces that may not be as spacious, I could go, oh yeah, I can fit in there. Or when you're backing up, you're not like, oh god, I'm steering this giant pointy bed at the back of my truck, and I really hope I don't stab any cars behind me, which, with the back of that Cybertruck, it looks like you could very easily just puncture anything you back into. Hopefully, the Tesla will make sure that doesn't happen, but there's a certain level of uncomfortability that can come along with a very large car like that. I know from driving them in experience. Some of you may like that if you're used to driving a big truck. You probably don't agree with me, but I'm just talking about what I personally feel. And that's why a smaller size Cybertruck could be a huge opportunity in several ways. For one, something we should address is what compromises do you have to make? Because obviously, I don't think we can have all the same specifications of the current Cybertruck in a smaller body, in a more compact design. So one suggestion I would make is that maybe it's not a 6-seater. Maybe we design the interior to be a tad bit more like the Model 3 and actually have a center console. This is something a lot of people missed when looking at the Cybertruck. Yeah, you got that 17-inch display there, but there's nothing beneath it. Why? Because, it's got to be a 6-seater. That means that you have to be able to sit 3 people in the front row, and in order to have leg room for that middle person, there's no storage compartments down there, there's nowhere to drop your phone, and as someone who's driven a Model 3 and knows how convenient it is to just get in, drop your phone on that charger and start driving, not to mention all that storage space you have below accessible there, I feel like the Cybertruck might be a little bit inconvenient in that way, because you're going to have to keep all your storage in that giant, thick middle compartment that folds up into being a middle seat. And if you were going with a smaller truck, maybe you just cut that out entirely, just have a regular center console in order to save on space. And I also assume the headroom would not be as great, despite the fact that I would like them to keep this design aesthetic. A lot of people would probably look at this tweet and think, oh, they're making a smaller truck. That means that they can change the design, turn it into a more traditional truck, and no. I would still like it to be a Cybertruck, even if it is smaller, even if the towing capabilities aren't as great, or maybe even the range isn't as good as that triple motor version. A smaller Cybertruck, I would still like to be, recognized on the road as, whoa, that ain't your average pickup truck, despite it being smaller. I would still love if they can keep the stainless steel design and the Tesla armor glass. I think these parts of the design should be standard with any Tesla pickup truck from here on out. Elon recently tweeted that they have surpassed 250,000 reservations for the Cybertruck, which the internet may troll on the design as much as they want, but if it's anything like AirPods, if it's anything like Old Town Road by Lil Nas, if you become a meme, you statistically do pretty well. Being memed on the internet doesn't necessarily mean your product is going to flop. No, I don't think it confirms that the Cybertruck already has 250,000 sales, but it does prove that there are people interested in it and they don't care about the design being weird. In fact, they like it. That's becoming more and more common. I've seen across the internet, people are getting accustomed to this design, and 250,000 people don't put $100 towards something they're not interested in or don't like the design of. If they're willing to put $100 down, even if it is refundable, that means that they're at least somewhat interested. Even if they aren't going to actually buy it on day one, they like it and they're willing to hold a place in line for it. But the smaller Cybertruck probably has some potential to reach an even wider demographic by having a lower starting price. This is the main reason I think Tesla should consider making one, and I'm glad to see Elon's considering it, is if they could make one that wasn't as gargantuan, wasn't this giant tank with a 6.5-foot bed, maybe compromise on that a little bit, maybe bring it down to a 5.5-foot bed, you know, nothing crazy. Remember, you're watching a guy who used to drive a Ford Ranger, okay? This thing was not a tank, not a big pickup truck, sit way high above everybody else on the road. No, this was like a, yeah, you can drive to school, drive to work and whatnot, and it's got a bed. You want to throw some stuff in the back. Keep it simple and keep it easy to park in this thing, and that's what I would really enjoy about a smaller Cybertruck. A lower starting price with hopefully comparable range. In fact, while I'm listing a few compromises they can make, range is one I actually don't want them to go too far on, particularly the base range, because the smaller Cybertruck is probably going towards a demographic of people that don't tow things very often. I think starting it at 250 miles is okay. You know, that's a pretty good sweet spot for the Model 3, and it's still a better range than the Ford Mach-E and the Model Y. So it's still better than typical EVs at around this price point, because I assume smaller Cybertruck would be cheaper than the current Cybertruck, which currently starts at 40 grand. Already a great deal, so if there was a way they could knock that down, keep this same manufacturing process that's supposed to be a lot cheaper, a lot easier to do, same durable glass, or I don't know, maybe if it's the smaller Cybertruck, you could use normal glass. You could just use the glass that's on the Model 3. I don't think people will be that upset. Maybe just make it an option at checkout to swap it out for armored glass for an extra couple grand. But there's already a lot of people on the internet that are probably wrongfully comparing the Cybertruck to a lot of other gas trucks and saying, look, this gas truck is cheaper and has better towing capabilities, or this truck is cheaper and has way better range. But so many people are acting like this is a gas truck. No one is considering the actual monthly cost to maintain the Cybertruck being drastically lower than other pickups. It's ridiculous how many like full-time car reviewers I've seen say, Cybertruck's not gonna do very well because I found this crappy Chevy for 10 grand cheaper and it has a slightly higher towing capability. Despite the fact that they're ignoring this can sit 6 people, it has a 6.5-foot bed, and the fact that it's electric. It's like saying the Model 3 is gonna be a flop because there are cheaper sedans on the market. You're not looking at the whole picture. Pickup truck market is huge. There's already been 1.5 million sales in the United States this year. Incredibly popular, which means they're not all the same way. It's not everybody buying the same truck. There's lots of different use cases. There's lots of different reasons people are buying a pickup truck, and that means that there's lots of different individual lifestyles that I think the Cybertruck will fit into very well. Sure, there may be some cheaper gas truck that can tow better for a cheaper price point, but people who are just looking for a truck to tow and nothing else, they're probably not considering the Cybertruck. The people reserving it are the ones buying it for the fact that it's a Tesla, it's electric, the supercharging network, the lower cost of ownership, no oil changes, no gas. And with pickup trucks, gas is particularly more expensive, as I've already seen a lot of people bring up in videos. They own commercial businesses, and the cost of maintaining lots of different pickup trucks, all that require gas, all that require new brake pads, all that require oil changes. If you could bypass all that, I'm sure tons of them would be willing to buy Cybertrucks knowing that they wouldn't have as much maintenance to go through. So a smaller Cybertruck could get that price point even lower than it already is to the people that may appeal more to the Toyota Tacoma demographic. Toyota Tacomas don't typically have very large beds. They're kind of average, but they can sit comfortably 5 people, and they're not huge. You know, they're not giant like this truck is, so they're still going to be easy to drive around town, park in normal parking spots, whereas Cybertruck might be a bit cumbersome for some, but I get it. A lot of people like that and will enjoy that part of the Cybertruck being a tank and being high off the ground. around and everything. But I think just making a more modest, more affordable Cybertruck could definitely get my attention, especially if they knocked it down to a starting price of like $35,000. It's only $5,000 cheaper, and there may be a lot of compromises you guys don't like, but in my opinion, I would totally go for a smaller Cybertruck over the big one. Like the design, like the way it's unique, I like the low polygon count, the stainless steel exoskeleton, that tough glass, but I don't need to sit 6 people, and I would like having a center console, and I don't need a bed that's 6.5 feet large. I would be fine with 5.5, and I'd be totally fine with a much lower towing capability, because I see trucks where I live all the time, and I can tell you 99% of them are never towing anything. I think there's a huge demographic of truck drivers that almost never tow things, so making a truck that's practical and useful for just hauling equipment around and being able to move furniture from houses and back and forth would still be totally practical, and having that lower entry point would get a ton of people switching over to electric and not burning so many fossil fuels for their daily routines. Let me know what you guys would like to see in a smaller Cybertruck. Is that something that would interest you, or you want the big one? You fine with the specifications they have and you would just pay the full price anyway, or would you be willing to save a little bit of money and go with a more comfortable size, one that can fit in the garage a little bit better? Thank you guys for watching. I hope you have an excellent day. Take care.